Good evening. I'm Richard Lainhart, and I spend all day long wrestling with computers. When I'm not doing that, I work with music and sound in my own studio and have ever since I started playing professionally in high school. My father owned an electronics store and was a hi-fi enthusiast, back when they still had hi-fi. And it was from him that I first picked up my basic technical skills, like how to plug components together without having them blow up. As a result, I was always the guy in the bands I played in who had to hook up the PA system because I was the only guy who could do it without blowing it up. This firm foundation led to an exciting career as a recording engineer, sound designer, synth programmer, and basically anything technical having to do with music.
In the early 90s, Richard Lainhart worked for a company called NovaWorks, which sold the latest computer hardware and software. While across town, I was working for an engineering firm in Midtown Manhattan that used all the stuff. This means that during the multimedia revolution that changed the print and video industries, Richard and I were both lucky enough to be exposed to all of this cool new revolutionary tech. One piece of software we both used was called Electric Image, and it was so expensive and so complicated that a group of strangers got together to share tips on how to use it. And that's where I first met Richard. It turned out we both had a warped sense of humor, and we shared a passion for teaching, or at least for showing off. And even though we had very different sensibilities, Richard was organized, neat, and meticulous in his workspaces, whereas I was not. Nonetheless, we became fast friends, and shifted our focus to the software that would essentially anchor the next phase of our lives, Adobe After Effects. Richard and I co-founded the New York After Effects user group and then ran it for 5 years. In 1997, I co-founded a training company, which originally focused solely on After Effects, and then later a software company making After Effects plugins. And Richard helped with all of these things, writing manuals, beta testing, offering feedback, while he still worked for NovaWorks. But he was ready to move on. And when my software company was sold to Adobe and we decided to invest the proceeds into growing the training company, Richard came to work with me full time. It was Richard who suggested locating the new facility in Rockland County, New York, mostly because he lived there and he wanted an easy commute. But Denise and I wanted to change anyway, so we set up shop in Valley Cottage and started building and growing what we hoped was the coolest production facility on the East Coast.
I think that the idea behind Total Training is that it is driven by creativity and not simply by deadlines and the bottom line. We certainly don't have that attitude that I've seen at most post houses where I've worked in the past, that people who work in production are essentially slaves that are essentially required to crank out a certain amount of profit every year, and if they don't, they're out. Before I came here, I worked in New York City as a computer consultant and as a systems integrator at places like Showtime and Viacom and MTV and many different places like that. And I got to see a lot of those facilities up close and became familiar enough with them to realize that that's not the kind of place where I wanted to work.
One of the highlights of the Valley Cottage facility was our little theater. During the work week, we held staff meetings there, gave demos, rehearsed presentations, but after hours, we showed movies, performed karaoke, did theatrical readings, and on one momentous occasion, Richard and Jordan delivered a concert there that was immortalized on DVD. For about 8 years, Richard and I were the first into the office every morning. We'd sit and talk about life, news, politics, business. Our years in Valley Cottage represented some of the hardest work we ever did, but also some of the happiest times we ever had. We were all dedicated to making great stuff while having a great time doing it. And of course, the job still enabled us to play with some awesome new technology. We got the loan of a high-speed Phantom camera for a month to feature in a Final Cut series. And of course, it was Richard who took it home for a weekend and got the best shots on his back patio. But nothing lasts forever, and boring economic pressures meant we had to eventually close the New York facility and shift to a training model using remote workers. And then one morning, my dear friend Richard did a very Richard thing. After accidentally locking himself out on his roof in the rain trying to fetch his cat, he decided the logical thing to do was to jump off the roof, which he did, and he broke his pelvis. And during his recovery, Richard left Total Training. This was sad for both of us, but great for the music world because Richard was now able to focus his considerable gifts on the recordings for which he's now justly famous. For me, though, Richard remained a friend who could always solve a technical problem, could always distract me from a bad situation, and could always say or do something to brighten up a dark room.
And so, for Total Training, this is Richard Lainhart saying so long.
I miss you, Richard, every day.